Faded constellation Lyra Navarro stared at the untouched dinner growing cold on the table. The flickering candles burning lower as minutes stretched into hours. The message on her phone remained the same. Sorry, emergency at work. Don't wait up. She blew out the candles with a sigh that carried 5 years of accumulated disappointment. At 32, Lyra had become an expert at eating alone, sleeping alone, celebrating achievements alone, all while technically being in a relationship. Their apartment felt more like a museum of what could have been than a home. Framed photos showed happier times. Theo and Lyra hiking in Yosemite. Theo and Lyra at her graduate school graduation. Theo and Lyra on their 3rd anniversary trip to Maui, back when Theo still made time for them. Lyra uncorked the wine she'd bought for dinner and poured herself a generous glass. She carried it to the balcony of their high-rise apartment and looked up at the night sky. Though the city lights obscured most of the stars, somewhere up there was Cassiopeia, her favorite constellation. Lyra had once been on track to become an astrophysicist, spending nights at university observatories mapping celestial bodies and cataloging their movements. Now she worked as a science editor for a textbook publisher, her telescope gathering dust in the spare room they called Theo's home office. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Elena. How was the anniversary dinner? Lyra typed back, what anniversary dinner? Emergency at work again. Elena's reply came quickly. That's the 3rd time this month. When are you going to admit this isn't working? Lyra didn't respond. What could she say? That she'd invested 5 years in a relationship that was slowly disappearing like a dying star? That she was afraid of starting over at 32? That despite everything, she still remembered the Theo who had once looked at her like she hung the moon? She finished her wine and went inside, pausing at Theo's office. On impulse, she opened the door and turned on the light. Her telescope sat in the corner covered with a sheet. She pulled it off, running her fingers over the familiar contours of the instrument. A brochure on Theo's desk caught her eye. Northwestern Astronomical Society presents Cosmic Origins Conference. The event was scheduled for this weekend in Chicago. Lyra picked up the brochure, confusion turning to hurt. Theo had mentioned nothing about this conference. Though he knew her passion for astronomy, had he planned to go without telling her? Or had he simply brought the brochure home and forgotten about it, knowing she would never find it in his private space? Her phone buzzed again. Theo, don't bother saving dinner. Grabbed something with the team. Something shifted inside Lyra, a tectonic movement of emotion. She looked at the brochure again, then at her neglected telescope. Before she could second-guess herself, she opened her laptop and booked a ticket to Chicago for the conference. For once, she wouldn't wait for Theo's permission or inclusion. She would reclaim a piece of herself that had been fading like a distant star. When Theo finally came home after midnight, Lyra was already in bed pretending to sleep. She felt him slide under the covers, maintaining the careful distance that had become their normal. He didn't reach for her, didn't whisper goodnight. In the darkness, Lyra opened her eyes and looked at the shadowy ceiling, imagining it was the night sky, vast and full of possibilities she had forgotten to believe in. I'm going to Chicago this weekend, she said into the darkness. Theo's breathing paused. What? There's an astronomy conference. I'm going. A long silence followed. Okay, he finally said, his voice neutral. I've got work to catch up on anyway. Of course he did. Lyra turned away from him, curling around her decision like it was a small flame she needed to protect. For the first time in years, she felt something other than resignation. A flicker of anticipation, a whisper of the passion she used to feel when gazing at the stars. This weekend she would look up again, and maybe, just maybe, remember who she used to be before she became a satellite in Theo's orbit, endlessly circling a center that barely acknowledged her existence. Celestial encounter. The Cosmic Origins Conference bustled with energy as Lyra collected her attendee badge. Around her, astronomers, physicists, and space enthusiasts exchanged theories and discoveries with animated gestures. She felt simultaneously out of place and like she'd finally come home. First-timer? Asked the volunteer at the registration desk, noticing her hesitation. Lyra nodded. First time in a long while, actually. Don't miss the exoplanetary habitability panel at 2, the young woman suggested. Dr. Astrid Nova is speaking. She's brilliant. Lyra found a seat in the back of the main hall for the opening keynote. As she settled in, someone slipped into the chair beside her. This seat taken? A melodic voice asked. Lyra looked up and felt her breath catch. The woman standing there was striking in a way that defied conventional beauty. tall and graceful with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to shift between violet and indigo, depending on how the light hit them. Her skin had a subtle lavender undertone that Lyra initially attributed to the hall's unusual lighting. "No, please," Lyra gestured to the empty seat. "Thanks." The woman sat with fluid grace. "I'm Astrid." "Lyra." They shook hands briefly, and Lyra felt an unusual warmth spread from the contact. "Are you presenting?" Astrid's lips curved into a smile. "Later today, you?" The keynote began before Lyra could respond. But throughout the presentation on galactic formation, she remained acutely aware of Astrid beside her. Occasionally, their arms would brush, sending unexpected shivers across Lyra's skin. At the lunch break, Lyra expected Astrid to disappear into the crowd of more important scientists. Instead, she found herself being led to a quiet corner of the venue's garden. "Tell me about your work," Astrid said as they sat on a stone bench beneath flowering trees, "before you left astronomy." Lyra hesitated, then found herself describing her graduate research on potential habitable zones in distant star systems. Astrid listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a deep understanding of the subject. "You have a unique perspective," Astrid commented. "You see patterns others miss." Lyra felt herself blushing. "It's been so long since anyone cared about this part of me." Something sad flickered in Astrid's expression. How does someone stop caring about the most luminous aspects of another person? The question hit Lyra like a meteor. How indeed had Theo stopped seeing her passion, her intelligence, her dreams, or had he ever truly seen them at all? At the exoplanetary habitability panel, Lyra watched in awe as Astrid took the stage. She spoke with authority and vision about worlds beyond their solar system, challenging conventional thinking about what constituted habitable conditions. "We limit ourselves by our Earth-centric definitions," Astrid argued, her voice carrying through the hall. "Life adapts to its environment in ways we've barely begun to comprehend." During the question period, Lyra found herself raising her hand, surprising even herself. "Yes?" Astrid acknowledged her with a smile. "You speak as if you've seen these other worlds," Lyra said. "How do you maintain such certainty about possibilities we can only theorize?" A curious hush fell over the audience. Astrid's eyes locked with Lyra's. "Sometimes," she answered carefully, "we know things beyond what our current instruments can measure. Intuition is just recognition of patterns we haven't consciously processed yet. Just observing," Lyra admitted. "I used to study astrophysics, but I've been away from the field for years." Something flickered in Astrid's unusual eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. "What drew you back?" The question was simple, yet Lyra found herself struggling to answer. "I think I needed to remember something I lost." Astrid studied her with surprising intensity. "Stars have excellent memories," she said cryptically. "Even when they seem to disappear, they leave traces of themselves across the universe." That evening, Lyra found herself accepting Astrid's invitation to dinner at a small restaurant away from the conference center. As they talked beneath the strings of lights on the patio, the stars gradually appearing above them, Lyra felt herself awakening from a long hibernation. "Why did you really come this weekend?" Astrid asked over dessert, her spoon delicately breaking the surface of a crème brûlée. Lyra considered evading but found herself unable to be anything but honest under Astrid's gaze. "My boyfriend had a brochure for this conference. He didn't mention it to me, even knowing my background. I think I came partly out of spite." Astrid tilted her head. "And the other part?" "To remember who I am when I'm not just someone's girlfriend." The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. Astrid reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching Lyra's wrist. "The stars never forgot who you are, Lyra Navarro. Perhaps it's time you remembered too." Gravitational shift Lyra returned to her hotel room that night with her mind spinning. Something about Astrid made her feel simultaneously unsettled and more centered than she had in years. They had exchanged numbers with a promise to meet for the conference's final day tomorrow. She sent Theo a brief text. "Conference is amazing. How's your weekend?" His reply came an hour later. "Busy with the Johnson account. Glad you're having fun." No questions about what she was learning, who she was meeting, how she felt being back in her element. Just acknowledgement and a return to his own concerns. Lyra slept fitfully, dreaming of purple skies and distant worlds where the rules of gravity worked differently. The next morning, Astrid was waiting for her at the conference entrance with 2 cups of coffee. I guessed you might need this, she said, offering one to Lyra. How did you know how I take my coffee? Lyra asked after the first perfect sip. Astrid's smile was enigmatic. Educated guess. They attended sessions together throughout the morning, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they shared observations in whispered conversations. During a break, they found themselves alone in a small exhibition on interstellar communication attempts. Have you ever felt like you don't quite belong where you are? Lyra asked suddenly. Astrid's expression grew serious, more than you might imagine. With Theo, I sometimes feel like we're speaking different languages, like we're in the same room but existing in separate dimensions. Astrid studied the displays of radio waves sent into deep space. Perhaps you are. Not all beings are meant to orbit the same centers. Something in her phrasing caught Lyra's attention. You have an unusual way of speaking. Do I? Astrid turned, and for a moment Lyra could have sworn her eyes flickered with an inner light. Where are you from, Astrid? Lyra asked quietly. Much farther than Chicago, she replied with a small smile. Would you like to see something few humans ever witness? That evening, Astrid drove them far outside the city to a dark field where she set up equipment more advanced than any telescope Lyra had ever encountered. What is this? Lyra asked, running her fingers over the smooth, unfamiliar metal. Something of my own design, Astrid said. It allows perception of wavelengths your conventional instruments cannot detect. When Lyra looked through the eyepiece, she gasped. The stars weren't just points of light, but seemed to pulse with color and movement, connected by faint threads of energy. How is this possible? She whispered. Astrid stood very close behind her, her breath warm against Lyra's neck. There are many realities layered within what you perceive as space. Many worlds existing simultaneously. Lyra turned to face her, suddenly aware of their proximity. Who are you, really? In the starlight, Astrid's skin seemed to shimmer with a definite purple undertone that could no longer be explained by tricks of lighting. I think you already know, Astrid said softly. Your mind is too brilliant not to have put the pieces together. That's impossible, Lyra whispered. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't. The strange warmth of Astrid's touch, her otherworldly knowledge, the subtle differences in how she moved and spoke. Is it? Astrid asked. You've spent your life studying the stars, searching for evidence of life beyond Earth. Why is it so hard to believe that life might also be searching for you? Lyra reached out hesitantly, her fingers tracing the curve of Astrid's cheekbone, feeling the unusual texture of her skin, smooth like silk, but with a subtle pattern invisible to the eye. Why me? Lyra asked, her voice barely audible. Because, you see, Astrid replied simply. Even when others told you to look away, some part of you kept searching the skies. Under the vast expanse of stars, Lyra felt the last of her doubt dissolve. Whether this was madness or miracle, she knew with sudden clarity that her life had irreversibly changed course, like a comet captured by the gravity of a new star. Show me, she whispered. Show me what you really are. Binary system Lyra spent Sunday in a daze, her world fundamentally altered by what Astrid had revealed. In the privacy of Astrid's hotel room, she had watched in awe as the woman's carefully maintained human appearance subtly shifted, her purple skin glowing with bioluminescent patterns that responded to her emotions. My people have been observing Earth for generations, Astrid explained. Some of us live among humans for research purposes. We're particularly interested in how your species forms emotional bonds. Why reveal yourself to me? Lyra had asked, still struggling to process the reality before her. Astrid's expression softened. It wasn't planned. But when I saw you so bright yet diminishing yourself to fit someone else's orbit, I felt... She hesitated, searching for the right word, resonance now. As Lyra's flight touched down in her home city, she felt like a different person returning to a life that no longer fit. Theo had texted that he would be working late again, leaving her to take a rideshare home alone. The apartment felt colder, more sterile than ever. Lyra wandered from room to room, seeing everything with new eyes. The spaces where her interests had been gradually erased, replaced by Theo's preferred minimalist aesthetic. Her books on astronomy packed away, her colorful throws replaced with neutral tones, her eclectic music collection relegated to digital files rather than displayed proudly as they once had been. When had she allowed herself to become so invisible in her own home? Lyra unpacked her suitcase, placing Astrid's contact information, written on actual paper at Lyra's request, carefully in her nightstand drawer. They had agreed to speak the following day, giving Lyra time to process everything. At midnight, Theo finally returned, loosening his tie as he entered the bedroom. "You're still up?" he observed, surprise evident in his voice. "How was the conference?" "Life-changing," Lyra said honestly. "I met someone who reminded me of who I used to be." Theo nodded absently, already scrolling through emails on his phone. "That's nice." "Theo," Lyra said more firmly, "we need to talk." Something in her tone finally captured his full attention. He looked up, really seeing her for perhaps the first time in months. "What's wrong?" "Everything," Lyra replied, surprising herself with her certainty. "We're wrong. What we've become." Theo sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "What are you talking about?" "When was the last time you asked me about my dreams? My work, anything that matters to me?" Lyra asked. "When was the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about your job, or this apartment, or social obligations?" "I've been busy," he began. "We're all busy, Theo." "That's not an excuse for forgetting to love someone." His expression hardened. "Is this because of the conference? You spend one weekend with a bunch of stargazers and suddenly our 5 years together means nothing." "Our 5 years mean everything," Lyra countered. "That's why it hurts so much to realize we've been going through the motions for at least 3 of them." The conversation stretched into the early hours, painful, honest, and ultimately liberating. There were moments of anger, of grief, of shocking recognition as they both acknowledged the slow death of what had once been love. "I never meant to make you feel invisible," Theo said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," Lyra replied gently, "but you stopped seeing me anyway." By morning, Theo had packed a bag and arranged to stay with a friend. They agreed to sort out the apartment details later. At the door, he paused. "Was there someone else at the conference?" Lyra considered the cosmic improbability of her answer. "I found myself at the conference. Everything else followed from that." After he left, Lyra sat alone in the quiet apartment, expecting to feel devastation. Instead, she felt something unexpected: space, room to expand, freedom to become. She called Astrid, who answered immediately as if she'd been waiting. "It's done," Lyra said simply. "Are you all right?" Astrid's concern warmed her even through the distance. "I'm more all right than I've been in years," Lyra replied, surprised by the truth of it. That night, Astrid's ship, disguised to human technology as a private aircraft, landed at a small airfield outside the city. When Lyra saw her emerging from the unusual craft, her purple skin glowing softly in the darkness, she felt no hesitation as she ran to meet her. Their embrace transcended species, planets, and probability, 2 beings finding recognition in each other across the vast odds of an expanding universe. "What happens now?" Lyra whispered against Astrid's shoulder. "Now," Astrid said, drawing back to look into Lyra's eyes, "we discover the new constellation we can form together." Cosmic alignment. 3 months passed in a blur of discovery. Lyra had moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of the city, close enough to continue her editing job, but far enough to provide privacy for Astrid's comings and goings. Their relationship unfolded like a cosmic flower, each day revealing new wonders and connections. Astrid's knowledge had rekindled Lyra's scientific passion. Together, they converted the cottage's sunroom into an observatory filled with a combination of Earth technology and subtle enhancements from Astrid's world. "You should consider returning to research," Astrid suggested, one evening as they lay on the roof deck, watching meteors streak across the sky. "Your theories about habitable zones were remarkably accurate." Lyra rolled onto her side, studying the subtle luminescent patterns that appeared on Astrid's purple skin when they were alone together. "Would that create problems for you? For your people's secrecy?" Astrid's fingers traced patterns along Lyra's arm. "Actually, my mission includes identifying humans who might be ready for more direct knowledge of the universe." Lyra laughed softly. "Is that what you call this?" She gestured between them. "A mission objective." Astrid's expression grew serious. "You were never just an objective, Lyra. You were the exception to every protocol I was meant to follow." They had learned to navigate the complexities of their physiological differences with patience and creativity. Astrid's touch carried a subtle electric current that heightened Lyra's senses, while Lyra's human warmth created patterns of pleasure across Astrid's photosensitive skin. Their intimacy was a constant process of discovery, each connection teaching them new ways that different forms of life could harmonize. One morning, Lyra received an unexpected text from Elena. Surprise housewarming party this Saturday. Theo will be there too, says he wants to bury the hatchet. Say yes. Lyra stared at her phone, anxiety rising. Since the breakup, she had maintained contact with friends but had been deliberately vague about her new relationship. How could she explain Astrid? What's troubling you? Astrid asked, immediately sensing her distress. Lyra showed her the message. I haven't told anyone about us. About what you are. Astrid considered this. What do you want to do? I don't want to hide you, Lyra said firmly. But I also don't want to compromise your safety or your mission. Astrid's expression softened. My people have technologies that allow us to appear fully human when necessary. It's how we've lived among you for generations. So you could come as, what, my new girlfriend? Is that what I am? Astrid asked with a small smile. Lyra felt warmth rise to her cheeks. You're so much more than that. You're my cosmic alignment. Saturday evening arrived with Lyra's stomach in knots. Astrid had used her technology to adopt a completely human appearance. Her purple skin tone replaced with a golden tan, her slightly luminescent eyes now a deep brown. Only Lyra, knowing where to look, could detect the subtle alien grace in her movements. Elena's new house was already filled with friends when they arrived. Lyra felt Astrid squeeze her hand reassuringly as they stepped inside. Lyra! Elena rushed to embrace her, then stepped back to assess Astrid with obvious curiosity. And you must be the mysterious new roommate Lyra's been so secretive about. Astrid Nova. She introduced herself with perfect human casualness. It's lovely to meet you. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Astrid charmed Lyra's friends with her knowledge and wit. Careful to present herself as an astronomer who had recently relocated from abroad, Lyra began to relax, thinking perhaps the evening would pass without incident. Then Theo arrived. Lyra spotted him across the room, his expression freezing when their eyes met. He looked exactly the same, yet somehow like a stranger. Someone from a life she had already begun to forget. I should say hello. Lyra murmured to Astrid. Will you be okay for a minute? Astrid nodded. Of course. Lyra crossed the room, accepting Theo's awkward hug with practiced politeness. You look well, she offered. So do you, he replied, his eyes drifting past her to where Astrid stood talking with a group of friends. Is that her? Lyra frowned. Her? The reason you ended things so suddenly. Helena mentioned you moved in with someone new almost immediately. It wasn't sudden, Theo, Lyra corrected gently. It was years in the making. We both know that. Before he could respond, Astrid appeared at Lyra's side. I don't believe we've been introduced, she said, extending her hand to Theo. I'm Astrid. The moment their hands touched, Theo's expression changed from polite curiosity to odd confusion. He pulled his hand away quickly. Your hand. It's strange, he said, then looked more closely at Astrid's face. And your eyes, they're not right. Lyra felt panic rising. Astrid's technology must have momentarily glitched at the contact. What do you mean? Elena asked, joining the uncomfortable circle. Look at her, Theo insisted. Something's off. Where did you say you were from again? Astrid remained perfectly composed. I believe your discomfort has more to do with my relationship with Lyra than any perceived physical anomalies. Theo shook his head. No, it's more than that. Lyra, what aren't you telling everyone? Who is she really? The room had grown quiet, attention focusing on their small group. Lyra felt a lifetime of conformity urging her to deflect, to laugh off Theo's accusations, to protect the comfortable ignorance of her friends. Instead, she reached for Astrid's hand, interlacing their fingers deliberately. Astrid is the person who helped me remember who I am, she said clearly. She's brilliant, compassionate, and sees me completely. How she sees the world differently than some of us is part of what makes her extraordinary. Astrid's fingers tightened around hers, a subtle pulse of energy passing between them in gratitude. But, Theo began again. No, Lyra interrupted firmly. I spent years making myself smaller to fit into a life that was slowly erasing me. I won't do that anymore, not for you, not for anyone. She turned to address the room at large. Astrid and I are together. She's different in all the best ways, and she makes me happier than I've been in years. Anyone who can't accept that doesn't need to be part of our lives. In the silence that followed, Elena stepped forward and raised her glass. Well, I for one am thrilled to see Lyra looking so damn happy. To new beginnings. The tension broke as others joined the toast. Theo stood for a moment longer, confusion and hurt evident on his face. before quietly slipping away from the gathering. Later that night, back at their cottage under a sky brilliant with stars, Astrid's technology deactivated, returning her to her true purple-skinned form. "You defended me," she said softly as they lay together. "You chose potential ridicule over denial." "I chose truth," Lyra replied, tracing the now visible patterns on Astrid's skin. "I chose us." Astrid's eyes glowed with emotion. "In all my research on human connections, I never expected to experience one so fully. My people will struggle to understand what has happened between us. Will you be punished for becoming involved with me?" Lyra asked, sudden concern clouding her joy. Astrid smiled. "Quite the opposite. They might ask me to bring you to them. Your willingness to accept difference, to embrace the unknown. It suggests humanity might be readier for contact than we thought." Lyra gazed up at the stars visible through their bedroom skylight. "So our love story might change two worlds?" "It already has," Astrid whispered, drawing Lyra closer. "It already has." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the boundaries between human and alien, earthly and cosmic, known and unknown, continued to dissolve, leaving only the truth that love, in any form from any world, remains the most powerful force in the universe.